donkeys, or mules, those lovable, tame, dumb-looking, stubborn animals that are the cuisines of our majestic horses. Mules and donkeys are fun, hilarious even. I like mules. Anyways, there's mules in the following movies. Kinda. Ha 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 ha. Anyone who was a teen in the 90s knows who Beavis and Butthead are. He he he. For those who don't, they are two metalhead kids who sit on their sofa and watch MTV back when it still had music and do all kinds of stupid stuff. He he he. The original series ended in 97, they had a movie in 96 and a return to TV in 2011, and now, to everyone's surprise, they return again in a second movie. In this film, Beavis and Butthead by some strange occurrence get admitted into 1998's NASA and are sent to space. Needless to say, they fuck up hee hee and are thrown out, heading face first hee 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 ha 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 into a wormhole traveling to the far-flung future of 2022. Ha 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 ha. Now, for the people who don't know, Beavis and Butthead were foul, politically incorrect, and didn't give a rat's ass hee hee about people's feelings. And I'm glad to say that traveling to 2022, where the woke mob and cancel culture reigns, hasn't changed them at all. It's glorious to see them get into all kinds of trouble and not giving one boob hee hee about being cancelled. Modern life hasn't changed Beavis and Butthead, and that's for the best. There are a lot of comedic moments in this, though of course it's a specific type of humor that might not be for everyone. All the hallmarks of Beavis and Butthead are back. The laughing, the dumbness, the nasty stuff, the word plays, the sex hee hee, cornholio, the works, hee hee, and for fans it's just great hee hee. If you never saw a Beavis and Butthead episode, then be sure to check this out and step into three wonderful worlds of edge 90s adult cartoons placating to teens and tweens alike. Hee hee hee. Smash that. Francis the Talking Donkey, aka Francis the Talking Mule, cause who is being speciest about it all, is a 1950s comedy film about a silly soldier and his very smart talking donkey called Francis. Yes, a talking donkey. Amidst the Korean War, poor Peter Sterling, played by Donald O'Connor, gets separated from his platoon and stumbles upon Francis, who mysteriously talks to him. He carries him back to base and a friendship forms that will span several movies. The first film is pretty straightforward and plays out as a story told by Peter to his current employer. It mainly deals with him coming to terms that he is talking to a donkey and attempting to convince his fellow soldiers, generals and nurses that are taking care of him that he is not insane. There's some genuinely funny moments in there, but this is very much a film of its time. Black and white, very wholesome, some slightly edgy jokes for those days, and overall pretty wholesome. Hell, it spawned a whole franchise, so it must have been popular, right? EAA. Smash that. In Francis Goes to the Races, the second movie in the Francis the Talking Donkey franchise, our smartass and his sidekick enter their way into the stables of a horse racing organization to do some prime breeding. With the help of Francis, Peter is able to win some nice money in beats and help the people breed good stock. Unfortunately, where there is betting, there is some sort of crime, and this time it's of course the mob that interferes. Cue a bunch of shenanigans and mishaps as both Francis as well as Peter attempt to foil not only the mob but also three people reluctant to believe his unique talent. Francis Goes to the Races, more of the same. More silliness, more jokes, more dames. Check that. The third Francis movie, Francis Goes to West Point, has our Korean War hero foil a couple of atomic plant saboteurs and promptly gets enlisted into West Point to share his awesome knowledge. Little do they know that he derives all his knowledge from a donkey called Francis, and that he, on himself, is pretty useless as a soldier, let alone an instructor. But things work out, since this is a feel-good movie about a talking donkey from a bygone era where people still enjoyed the simple things in life. Wholesome family fun with hit-and-miss comedy, but a whole lot of heart. Though like most franchises, the quality of the movies is bound to deteriorate the more they are made, right? Check that. In the fourth movie of the Francis franchise, our anti-hero Peter Sterling, still played by Donald O'Connor, is in the big city and has a job as a newspaper copy boy. His ambitions to become a real reporter are helped by our mule Francis, who feeds him all kinds of gossip and information that other, real reporters can use. When he stumbles on some big scoops, he catches the eye and ire of well-intentioned as well as not-so-good-intentioned folks, and who believes a mule can talk right. More of the same in this Francis movie. The jokes still are pretty mundane and not knee-slapping hilarity, but when is the last time you actually did that in any comedy movie of recent times? Being in the newsroom makes this film almost feel like a sort of 1940s Superman spoof, but of course the only true superhero in the room is Francis himself. Check that. The fifth Francis movie, Francis joins the WACS, is a doozy. For us non-Americans, the WACS is the Women's Army Corps, a branch of the American Army that existed back in those days to give women a shot in the military as well. How did Francis and Peter get into the Women's Corps, you say? Well, a computer error, of course. Once arrived there, he has to adjust himself to the way the women do it, but quickly decides to help all these lovely dames out in order to stick it to the male side of the army that is trying to keep them down. This movie features the voice actor for Francis, Chill Wills, in a separate role as the general who doesn't believe the Army Corps is for women. Having similar voices, this is of course used and abused by Francis and Peter to get their way. There's some genuinely funny stuff in here though that might be due to the fact I was so enamored with all the lovely classic dames that were oozing style and class on the screen. Cause whoa, women in movies back then really jumped out of the screen in the most magnificent way. As for the rest, I found this episode slightly more enjoyable than the fifth and the third film, though most of the style and humor is pretty much the same. This is no surprise, since these movies are all directed by Arthur Lubin and feature the same main actors as Peter and Francis. Smash that. Francis in the Navy is the seventh Francis movies, and as you might have guessed, he is in the Navy this time. Well, he's lured into the Navy by a doppelganger called Slick O'Donovan, who just happens to be one of the biggest players in the Corps and has every dame longing for his lips. As he alludes to having some fun as a citizen, our friend Peter is stuck in a military organization he doesn't know anything about. He is, after all, an army, and those army legs don't fare well on water, unlike Francis, who has no problems at all. Maybe the most surprising aspect of viewing this movie was the fact that none other than Clint Eastwood appears in this movie as a fellow sailor, and he has speaking lines and everything. It's quite the treat to see young Eastwood at work next to the then more famous O'Connor and Francis the Talking Mule. Overall good stuff. Especially because O'Connor is allowed to play something else than a doofus in the role of his doppelganger. And still great dames, of course. More of the same. Still pretty good. Smash that. The seventh movie in the Francis franchise has our beloved mule enter a haunted house. And this, my friends, is finally the one where Francis jumps the shark. It comes to no surprise when you know that this film wasn't directed by Arthur Lubin, didn't feature Donald O'Connor, and didn't even have Chill Wills as voice actor for Francis. Enter Charles Lamont as director, Mickey Rooney as David or Essett, the stand-in for Peter, and an uncredited Paul Frees as the voice of Francis. In Francis in the Haunted Mansion, our dear Mile is witness of a murder and warns bumbling reporter David Prescott. Seeing he's a bit of a buffoon, however, things don't go so well for him, and he has quite the difficult time to reveal the murder mystery behind a large inheritance. Oh, and the house is spooky, so a talking mule surely spices things up. This movie is by far the worst Francis movie in my opinion. It's void of creativity, and Mickey Rooney simply doesn't cut it for me. I don't mind Rooney as an actor, but something is missing here. Or more precisely, it's too Rooney, which is ironic since Rooney was the first choice to play Peter, but he decided to give it to his friend O'Connor. As it stands, this movie is too far removed from the other movies to appease the fans. It's a lot like Scooby-Doo, but with a mule and Rooney instead of Daphne and Velma and the other two geeks. And that, my friends, is a recipe that just doesn't cut it. Draw. that. Student Bodies is a self-proclaimed first comedy horror movie and pretty much a parody of all kinds of horror tropes that were used before 1981. We're in a typical American town where a killer named the Breather is terrorizing not-so-innocent teens in and out of the high school. This Breather character does not like it when teens are having sex, so instead of educating them into the ways of abstinence, he kills them in mostly brutal yet creative ways. Cue a whole bunch of cringy not-so-sex scenes and horror cliches wrapped in a fairly humorous package decades before Scary Movie was a thing. Part of the fun of the movie is of course to find out who is the killer, and even with it you will be left dumbfounded at the idiotic conclusion. Overall, this is a strong parody of Halloween, Friday the 13th and other early 80s and 70s horror films, but due to all the hilarity something ends up missing. This isn't particularly a good movie because it is, quite frankly, too goofy. There's a thing in comedy called timing. Something Taiko Waititi doesn't realize exists. We all hate the guy, or gal, who is funny all the time, don't we? Check that. Our final donkey movie isn't about talking donkey or idiots per se. It's actually a very famous and beloved French movie that depicts a fairy tale of yore. This fairy tale is about a king who loses his beloved wife and searches the land for a new wife that can give him a son. Finding none, he decides that it is only logical that he would marry the one he loves most and reminds him of his beloved, his very own daughter. His dutiful daughter, having much love for his father, is tempted but is quickly told by her fairy godmother that this act is unnatural. Timely and wise words: do not marry or have intercourse with your family. So the daughter and godmother create plots to keep the father from marrying his own daughter. All that fails, which results in some more drastic measures. Mainly, she decides to dress up as a dirty, smelly donkey to stay away from her father, becomes a recluse and an outcast, though it wouldn't be a fairy tale if a handsome prince stepped into the fray, wouldn't it? And thus, Donkey Skin is a very colorful, very cliché and ultimately weird French film that not only has colorful Disney-esque costumes but also singing and musical scenes. It's pretty much a live-action Disney princess movie and it all feels very very cheesy and low budget. The story itself borrows from several fairy tales and features some well-known ones like Member Berries before those existed. Overall, the film is a wee bit too, how do I say this, papermac for me. It doesn't look realistic. It doesn't feel realistic. It's theater on film, cardboard sets, weird unnatural colors, strange acting that works in animation but not necessarily achieves the same vibe in realistic film. And then there's the ending. I mean, what? Why? How? So strange to do that. French people? Really? So strange. No wonder it's a classic in France, to be honest. Silly Frenchmen. Anyways, check it for the novelty and that pretty lady Catherine Deneuve. Check that.